Okay, let's get to Esther. Oh, the plot thickens today. Esther, her Persian name, her Hebrew name right above that, Hadassah. So we're going to look at chapters 5 and 6. 2 chapters on a Sunday morning? We can't do 2 chapters. We have potluck to get to. We'll go fast. But what's really fun, again, I've said this before, narratives are just a blast because you're just reading a story. It's a true story, but it's a story. And so you glean the truth out of it without having to create an illustration. It is the illustration. And after we get done, then we'll pull some truths out of it. So let's just jump in here and see what last week. Oh, man, we left last week in a horrible situation. Remember Mordecai had come to his niece, Esther, and said, things are bad. You need to go to the king. You need to barge into the king's presence, which is, punishable by death. You need to go and tell him that he needs to stop this genocide of the Jews that this bad Haman guy started. You need to march right in there. And she very famously finally was convinced and said, okay, well, if I perish, I perish. So that's where we left her last week. She's ready to go through that door. And unless the king raises his golden scepter after she comes in, she will be put to death for interrupting the king's business. That's where we left it last week. Left you on pins and needles, didn't it? Yes. Cliffhangers. Some of you read ahead, I can tell, because you're not concerned. Okay. She can't ring the doorbell. She just has to bust right in. So that's what, by the way, this is a fascinating illustration of something Jesus said about her willingness to sacrifice herself. Jesus, well, wait, where did it go? Didn't I put it in there? Oh, I guess I didn't. Darn, I lost it. But it was Jesus said, basically, if you love your life, you'll lose it. And if you lose your life, you'll get it back. So in a real sense, she had to unlove her life as queen in order to be able to stay alive. And that's very much the case. It's a great illustration of it. John 14, I forget where that is. I'll have to, it's put a lot of places. That's 3 or 4 places. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what she does. Okay, let's look at it. Chapters 5 and 6. We're holding our breath to see if she dies. Chapter 5, verse 1. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes, stood in the inner court of the king's palace, and in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace, and everyone held their breath because it was the wrong thing to do. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And to accept the pardon, Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So, she didn't die. You knew that already. Okay, so he's going to ask. The king says to her, so what is it, Queen Esther? What's your request? It shall be given you even to half my kingdom. Okay. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I've prepared for the king. Kind of a savvy move, actually. Because if you think about the scene, you've got the king on his throne, you've got all his power guys all around the edges. Haman, the bad guy, is clearly there. He's got to be there. Haman must have accomplices as well. I mean, if she just came in there and just made her claim right there in the middle of court, there's so much politics going on, probably not a great idea. So tell you what, I have lunch set. Would you guys come over to lunch, you and Haman? She wants a private context. We'll talk about that later because it's pretty wise. So the king says, well, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, okay, so what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. That's actually a real qualifier. I mean, she could have said, I want everything from Turkey through Palestine and Egypt up to like the edge of the Crescent Valley. No, she wouldn't do that. But this is what the kings do. They say, here you go. So what is it? What is it? Now, they're at lunch. It's Haman and the king. It's a nervous moment for Esther because now we're putting everything on the line again in a way. So Esther answered, okay, so my wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, just get to it, Esther. Just get to it. Let the king and Haman come to the feast that I'll prepare for them, and tomorrow I'll do as the king has said. She just can't do it. Come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it. So she says, I'll do this again, and then we'll finally get to it. And okay. Well, in the middle of the time between that feast and tomorrow's feast, Haman went out that day after this first feast, just joyful and glad of heart. I mean, he was sitting with the king and the queen. Hoo, hoo. Yes. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate as he's leaving, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. What a bummer of a moment. He comes out of this personal, highly privileged lunch with the king and the queen. At the king, the queen actually asked for me to be in the lunch. That's me, Haman. And he's just floating like a kite. And as he leaves, again, he passes the queen's uncle, right, Mordecai, and he's out there, and he's doing what he's always done, which is he's not done anything in the presence of Haman. He doesn't stand or tremble, and it literally is shake. You should fear this guy when he comes by, because he could snap his fingers and point at you and have you killed. So, well, and you notice here as well, before we had people bowing down as a sign of respect, now we have people standing up, because you don't sit when someone of high order comes by. So when Haman comes out, he's ticked again that Mordecai again will not stand, and he will not shake in fear. And that just, well, as it says, fills him with wrath. Completely blew his day. He was having such a good day. He's mad. He's fighting mad. He could actually snap his fingers right there and take Mordecai out. I mean, he really could. I mean, he's just really ticked off. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, and he went home. I don't know why. He should have retaliated, but he didn't. He just goes home, absolutely enraged, filled with wrath. And he sent and he brought his friends and his wife Zeresh, and he dumps on them how mad he is. So while he's there, he recounts. Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Remember that when we started this thing out before the beauty festival, we talked about the rulers of the kingdom, the huge kingdom that goes from Turkey and Egypt all the way over to India. There were 7 of them. They were there at that big, 6-month feast. This guy's now above all of those. He's above all of them. So that's what he's talking about, how he's been advanced. So Haman, he recounts all this stuff to his family and to his wife. This is who I am. Do they know who I am? This is who I am. This is who I am. And then Haman says, look, even Queen Esther let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yes, me. Haman, I'm important. Verse 13, yet all this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. I mean, he's just miffed. I mean, he's got all his accomplishments. He's been advanced above all these people. He comes back just ticked back to his family and to Zeresh, and he recounts everything that's good about him, how rich he is, how many sons he's got, how much he's advanced in the kingdom, how much even the queen herself didn't ask anyone to come to the king and queen's lunch. She said, me. And this Mordecai, it just completely wrecks him. It completely wrecks him. Now, we know last week, this wrecked him to such a degree that he actually convinced the king, manipulated the king to allow him to put out a communique to the entire kingdom, Turkey to India, saying, go kill the Jews. You have official rights from the government. We will not get in your way. We will not interfere. And on that day, that one day alone, you can kill the Jews without any repercussions from us. Hands off from us. And that day's about a year away. So that's pending now. We got 12 months to go. That's pending. But still, this Mordecai guy is miffing Haman every single day he sees him. Well, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, look, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it, and then you can go joyfully with the king to the feast. This is simple, Haman. Build a gallows, have the king kill this guy. because the king is the one who can do this. Have the king kill this guy, and then it'll be off your shoulders, and you can joyfully go to lunch. How hard can that be? Huh, Haman? How hard can that be? By the way, the size of the gallows is a big deal here. Do you know how high this is? A cubit is about an arm's length. It's about 18 inches. So we're talking 75 feet. That is really up there. That's way higher than any telephone poles you'll see in town. Telephone poles are around 45 to 50 feet. So this is a big deal. And by the way, as an aside, when it says hang him on it, it may not be the hanging you're thinking of. Because, in fact, here's a clue. If you have an NIV Bible, it says it like this. Have a pole set up reaching to the height of 50 cubits. Ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it, and then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. Yeah, that's probably more like what it is, because it doesn't really say gallows in the Hebrew. It means big, long stick. And so almost everyone agrees this is like an impaling. You raise a stick and you impale a guy. And so doing it on the end of a very large stick is a way of telling people what you've done. So you can't impale him while it's up there. While it's on the ground, you impale him on the stick, and then you raise him up. He's like a flag. It's like telling everybody, look what I've done. So it's a statement of power. That's what it is. So, but 75 feet, man, that's big. So anyway, that's what's going on here. So this idea pleased Haman. Well, sure it did. Oh, I'm feeling better now. And he had the gallows made. There we go. That's fun. The story's ending nicely for Haman, isn't it? This is just great. Well, sleepless in Susa. Yes. So chapter 6. So on that night, so this is the night between the two feasts, on that night the king could not sleep. He was sleepless in Susa, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds and chronicles, and they were read before the king. So he's up sleepless. He says, I need some distraction to put me to sleep. Let's bring in the book that talks about all the great things that have ever been done in my kingdom. Yeah, let's do that. It'll say a lot about me. It'll make me feel better about me, and we'll all go to sleep. All the memorable, the best. It's the best of the kingdom of Ahasuerus. We'll do that. So he brings some guy in to read this, and they're reading it. And it was found written how Mordecai, this is the book, how Mordecai had told about Bigthan, remember him, Bigthana, and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Remember that way back, that little plot thing in the beginning? It mentioned that in there. And the king said, well, wait a second. What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? Did we do anything? Clearly he read ahead in the book and there was no celebration or anything. Did we do anything for this guy? And the king's young men attended him and said, whoa, nothing has been done for him. Oh, so the king said, hey, who's in the court right now? Now this is sleepless in Susa. This is at night. He hears someone in the court. And now Haman, it turns out, had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows, to have Mordecai impaled that he had prepared for him. Because remember, the king has to order this. So Haman can't sleep either. So he decides to go to the palace a little early and get all set so that early in the morning he can go to the king and say, you need to take out the Mordecai guy. And fortunately, I've got a big, long stick. That would be really convenient, but you need to order it. So he's there trying to figure out what to do. He's losing sleep, getting ready to talk to the king about the king killing Mordecai. So he's out there, and then the king's young men told him, well, Haman's out there standing in the court. Oh, so the king said, well, let him come in. Yeah, but bring him in. Let's bring him in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, Haman, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Okay, thinking about Mordecai. I mean, we got to celebrate this guy. So Haman, you're an expert on the kingdom. Well, what should be done to delight? And Haman said to himself, he didn't say this out loud, but he said to himself, hey, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Huh? Yeah. So when the king asks, how do you honor somebody? Haman's thinking about himself. Who would he honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, well, let's see. For the man whom the king delights to honor, yeah, that's me. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let's let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn. Actual king garb. Let's take the king's garb and put it on him, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. So let's get the king's clothes, the king's horse, the king's crown. Yeah. Now, he's thinking this very selfishly. He's like thinking, man, won't that be the day I got the king's clothing on, I'm riding the king's horse, and I've got the king's crown. I mean, it's the next best thing to being king. I would feel honored. Yeah, this would do it. This would do it. Yeah, this would do it, I think. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let's lead him on the horse through the square of the city. Yeah. So let's make him look like the king, and then take one of your top officials, maybe one of those other 7 dudes from the rest of the kingdom, and he'll hold the reins of the horse, and he'll march him through the center of the town. Yeah, man. Yeah, look at me. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And proclaiming as he goes, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Yeah. This is going to be great. This is just going to be great. Finally, someone appreciates me. Yes. Finally. You know this is not going to end well, don't you? Yeah. Then the king said to Haman, okay. He agrees. Hurry. Take the robes and the horse, as you've said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Do every single thing you said. Yeah, do that to Mordecai. And I got to believe Haman's standing there trying to control his response. Yeah, I did have something. And remember that part about getting a high official to lead the horse through town? There is no higher official in the kingdom but Haman. You can't make this stuff up. This is... So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, now do this with feeling, Haman, do this with feeling. Thus shall it be done to... I'm with feeling, Haman. Okay, thus shall it be done. No more feeling, Haman. Okay, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Blah. Okay, so he does this, and he has to parade Mordecai, his arch enemy, for whom he's contracted with the entire kingdom to kill millions of Jews. And he's got to march this guy around and honor him from the king, wearing the king's clothing on the king's horse with the king's crown. Gosh. I mean, you really just can't make this up. You need to make a movie of Haman leading this thing around, trying to control his reaction. And then during this movie, I see a close-up on the face of Mordecai while he's on the horse. And all Mordecai can do is look down at Haman. Or something. I don't know. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. So the humiliating day is over. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. Why do you think he covered his head, by the way? I think he just couldn't hide his emotional reaction. I think he was... Yeah. So Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. This is just wrong, he tells them again. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, well, Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall is of the Jewish people. You will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. It's an interesting prophecy, but they're basically saying, look, if Mordecai was your enemy and the Jews are your enemy, and the Jews are under an edict to die, and they're low, and you are lower than Mordecai, you might be going too. How's that for a picker-upper when you come back from the most humiliating day in your entire life? He comes back and he grouses to them and he says, well, this looks bad. This could be really bad for you. So, anyway, have a good day. Wow. And then a little point of dread comes in. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. And that's where the music in the background goes, dun, dun, dun. Pity your stomach. And we're going to stop it there. Because we like cliffhangers. Well, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You can read chapter 7. You can find out what happens. But there's the clue for you. That's the plot spoiler. There's a little bit of boomerang effect that's going to happen after this. So you can do that. Okay, so this is where we pull back and we take a look at what happened and trying to extract some truth out of this. It's a great story for one thing, but it tells you some interesting things about the characters and about God himself and how God has groomed some of these folks. And we'll start with Esther. And there's a lot of things you can say about Esther. You know, we anticipated this last week that she was going to, at the risk of her own life, she was going to intercede with the king. You know, good for her. And her uncle had said, you know, maybe this is the point in time that you've come to the kingdom for. Maybe this is the point in time why you are queen. It's for this point and for nothing else, but for this. And she goes, oh, well, okay. And she says, I'll do that. And if I perish, I perish. She doesn't perish, but she does have the courage to go out and do this very thing. And so you got to point out the fact that Esther, is courageous. She has a great amount of courage. What is courage, though? Well, courage is about doing what you need to do, even though fear may be incapacitating. You don't let the fear incapacitate you. You do what's necessary to do. And it doesn't mean you don't fear. Many times, from a Christian sense, it means you place your fear and your trust in God, who is reliable in that particular sense. But still, the emotion of fear is always going to be there. It'll tend to rule you, tend to force you into being a coward and doing nothing. But she decides, I'm not going to let that happen. I'll be courageous. And I have to believe that there's a large modicum of her understanding of who God is and who God is with the nation of Israel, even though they're in exile here in what was the Babylonian state, now the Persian state, that she would say, well, I'm still God's people, even though I'm not in the land. And if I perish, I perish. And that's not a bad thing on the reputation of God. But it could very well be that I'm the culmination of why I am beautiful, why he made me beautiful, and why he placed me so against the odds as the queen of Persia. I'll have to consider that that's God. It's literally walking in God's will in the midst of what should be fearful. She could have taken the cowardly path. Well, nothing's wrong. I don't want to risk my wonderful position as queen, and I live like a queen, literally, not queen for a day, but queen for the rest of your life. So I could try and put on blinders, but her uncle Mordecai was very good to tell her, nah, there's more at stake here. And what's at stake is not you just enjoying being queen, but using that position to save God's people. So that's what she does. She's courageous. By the way, there's a little bit of courage needed by all of us when we're in situations that we can predict the outcome that would produce some fear. And for us, it's not half of what this is. I don't think any of us are in any relationships where if you mention Jesus or you mention who God is, that they're going to kill you. But in other parts of the world, they will. So you have to weigh on the scales. The fear is not something you have to sort of conjure up. It comes to you. You know what's at stake. This could get you killed. But is the gospel worth that? Is the news about who Jesus is worth that? Well, like in Esther's case, if it comes to the salvation of millions of people, starting with this one, yes. And that's the hard thing that's going on. Today, across the world, if you take a look at persecuted religions, guess what's number one on the list? It's Christians. Just not here in the U.S. You get slams every now and then or off comments, and you're not in the middle of the culture and you sense that. Well, multiply that by 1 billion and you understand what it's like in other parts of the world. And so what she did should not be unusual for the follower of Jesus. It should be like commonplace, and it is commonplace everywhere else. So there she is, following God's sovereignty and trusting in him. Oh, here's where I put it. This is that verse. Remember I said there's a verse that illustrates? It was John 12. I was off by 2 chapters. Whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Hate is kind of a wrong translation. It basically says if you clutch onto your life here too much, you'll lose that life eventually. But the person unclutches their life here will gain it and on a much larger time scale for eternity. So for her, that was clearly the case. She was willing to let go of it. And in let going of it, she gained life, not only for herself, but for millions of people. Yeah. Also tact. And remember I said she didn't go into the court and make accusations against Haman in the court, right? Well, that's actually a biblical admonition. When you go to Matthew 18, you take a touchy subject like this, you don't do it in public, you do it in private. So she decides, instead of trying to try Haman in the court of all the politics and the power and the jostling for power, she decides, let's go intimate. I have lunch prepared. I have those little cucumber sandwiches with the crust cut off, and we can go over there and we can just sit down privately, the king and Haman and me, and we can bring up a very difficult subject. So when you're in a position where you have a very difficult subject to talk to somebody, even Matthew 18 says, do it privately. Do it privately first. Do it privately. Even Matthew 18 has a sequence. It says start super privately, just confront them. This is usually about sin. And then if that's not productive, if they don't respond to that, well, then take someone with you. Still private, but there's now 3 of you instead of just 2 of you. Yeah, do that. And then after a while, you sort of escalate it so that their resistance and their willfulness against this admonition is made more known. The pressure comes on them more that way. But she took the right path. She went tactfully small. Now, what I don't understand, and maybe you can help me with this, she went tactfully small with a nice little lunch out on the veranda, but why would she invite Haman? Why not just have her and the king? Wouldn't it be better, if I was writing a fictional story, I'd have her take the king off to lunch and then completely trash Haman behind his back? Right? Honey, do you love me? Well, yes, I do, honey. I think you're the most beautiful queen ever. Would you do anything for me? I would do anything for you, absolutely. Will you kill Haman for me? Well, sure. No, wait. But you can kind of play out the scene. She could be unfettered. She could work the king, kind of. She could even, if she's like most of us, she could bend the truth a little bit about how evil Haman really is. She could really, to me, it seems like a more influential thing is to have the private lunch, but to do it just her and the king. Why have Haman there? I'll still work on that. That's what's kind of interesting about it. She invited Haman as well in this 3-way lunch. I mean, if you work through how it was going to be revealed, the scenario would be she would suddenly out that she was in danger because she's a Jew, and then she's going to point the finger at Haman. Wouldn't it be easy to point the finger at Haman if he wasn't there? But interestingly enough, if he is there and she points the finger at him, his response, like we're saying, is a valuable thing. And there's no political support from his henchmen or anything like that. It's just Haman. So who knows? But I mean, I call that tactful. That's really, really good. And, that's something that we try and do too when we confront people or we have difficult conversations. Use tact and start private. That's usually the best way to go. And then lastly, this directness. So again, instead of going into the court, and when she goes into the court, and remember, this is like dozens of people in this court, lots of power jostling and politics and, alignments and all that kind of stuff. She could have gone straight into the court if you were writing another novel, go straight into the court, and she could have made her accusation about Haman in front of the king and all these other people, and then the king would ask her, who's the one that did that? And she could point at Haman, he's the guy that did that, right? Not quite as direct, really. It's more direct to sort of finger who the guy is right in the presence of the king. He's the guy. And you see how more personal it is in that particular sense? So she doesn't beat around the bush in any way, although she schedules a second feast because she can't quite get it out on the first feast. She's like, tomorrow. So, that good for her. But she is very direct about it. And I liked that because as believers, we ought to be very direct with people about what we believe and what the differences are. You don't really need to beat around the bush. You need to do it in a more private context and with great respect. But don't, in the last point, don't go accusing people who are in sin of their sin in the midst of very public contexts. That's just really wrong. And if you think that the humiliation in the moment is going to make anything happen in the life of the person so that they'll change, you're totally wrong about that. It's just not going to work. But you do need to be direct about it. You do need to be direct. not abusive, because if you believe that sin is a kind of spiritual cancer, then why wouldn't you be direct about its presence in someone's life if it's going to kill them? So that's kind of where we come from. Be direct. Don't beat around the bush. Be private. Use some tact, and things will get done. So I liked what she did. Esther I think she played this perfectly, and I just admire those things about her. Now let's go to Haman. Ooh, Haman, yeah. Actually, it's Haman, but we're not going to say that. Haman, we like Haman. By the way, did you see the Hamantashians here today? Did you make those, Laura? Are they all gone? There's one or two left. I mentioned those last week as it's the seasonal pastry for Jews when they celebrate Purim. This story, so it's the three-cornered hat of Haman, or sometimes they call those Haman's ears. I don't see that, but where I came from, where I grew up on the East Coast, they were Haman's hats, so they're back there. But anyway, Haman. Okay, what is there to say about Haman? What is there to say about Haman? Well, number one, he's filled with wrath. Remember, he starts off that way. He was having the best day ever. Why couldn't he just walk past Mordecai and not take it personally, and then comfort himself with the fact that, hey, I've just been done a great honor by the king. I'm going to lunch with the king and queen, Yeah, me, not you, not you. I mean, why couldn't he just walk past Mordecai and say, guess what I'm doing today? I'm eating with the king and queen. How about you? Eating little specks of seeds on the ground today, are you? He could have just humiliated him or done something because he doesn't like him. But the fact that he's so easily triggered to be filled with wrath tells you something about this guy's inside heart. And what does it tell you about his heart? Well, he's very insecure, full of himself. I mean, we went through some of the characteristics a couple weeks ago, and this is where we find out. What else does this tell you about his heart? It's fascinating. Insecure, full of himself, selfish, what? Depraved. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Yeah, or he's just an angry man. He's an angry man. Yeah. But what is it he got mad about in specific? What is he got mad about? Mordecai didn't do anything to attack him or anything. He didn't say anything. It wasn't any kind of conscious thing on Mordecai's part, except he just didn't do something. So why would that make someone like Haman so stinking mad? Why would that be so offensive to not respect him? Because Haman thinks more of himself than anyone else does. Yes. He thinks he deserves all these accolades because, after all, he's a superior Persian. After all, he's more superior than the 7 guys who run the kingdom. He's the one who gets honored by these lunches by the king and queen. He is clearly a superior Persian, and everyone needs to recognize this fact. I'm superior to you. Don't you see that? So when someone, by their inaction, constantly says, but you're not, it's an attack on his identity. He's got this false identity built up based on his position that he's worthy of this kind of scraping respect because he has inflated his worth far beyond what it really is. And Mordecai recognizes that and says, I'm not playing this game. I'm not playing this game. Because you are not a superior Persian. You're not. And so he doesn't recognize it. So this is really, we talked about self-identity. This is an identity problem. And the identity problem is the fact that he thinks more of himself than anyone else does. He thinks he's superior in every way. And people who don't recognize that by bowing down or standing up or doing something, people who don't recognize that are saying to me in their action or inaction that they don't think I'm something special. Now it starts to circle home pretty quick right here. Because many times we have an anger response that happens when you're treated like you don't, like it's not in consequence of who you think you are. I deserve more than this. Don't you know who I am? Yeah, this is not just a Haman disease. This is a disease of humankind, where we really tell ourselves over and over again that we are special and worthy and deserving, and we're not necessarily superior Persians, but I mean, we are something. So when you're treated as a nothing instead of at least a something plus, then you feel like people don't really know who you are. And that seems unjust. But that usually comes from an inflated sense of who you are. And it's not because they're dealing with you in the way you really are. It's because they're not dealing with you the way you think you are. Well, this is pretty common because in our lives we often go through and we look at how good we are, the good things we've done, how we treat people, how giving we are. We clearly are exemplary human beings because of the fullness of what we do and what we say. And of course, how can someone say such a horrible thing about me? Look at me. Don't you know who I am? Or in Haman's case, don't you know who I am? Right? So we do this too. I'm just saying, when you look at Haman, don't characterize him like a comic book character that he's the evil guy, and boy, I'm glad I'm not like him. Because biblically, every time you do that, look, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. See, that's what happens. This is a common trait. We suffer this, maybe not quite at this level that that Haman does, but we suffer this. What's the antidote to that, by the way? Well, thinking rightly of yourself. Yeah, thinking rightly of yourself. How do you know who you are really then? Well, God will tell you. Yeah, all we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has gone to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him, on Christ. There's something universal about us that none of us is up here. We are all down here. We are all universally strayers from the grace and loving kindness of God, and we spit in his face and ignore him, and that wandering is the substance of sin for humanity. We've come into this world by the hand of God, and then we looked at God and said, no thanks, and we've done our own thing. And that's what the animosity is about. So that's a big part of the picture. But there's a good side to this as well. Not only are we in the right sense down here types, none of us are up here types. We're all down here types, at the same level down here types. All of us have sinned. But the good thing is the fact that we're all made in the image of God, and God loves us. Even though we're jerks and we're wanderers and we, ignore God, he still loves us. And so our definition now, after coming to Christ, is the fact that, yes, I am by warrant of who I am down here because of the universality of my sin. But in another sense, I'm still down here, but I'm beloved by God. And now my worth comes from who God sees in me, not because of who I am, in that sense, in terms of accomplishing something. So yes, it turns out from day to day, I fail and I sin, and there's artifacts and remnants of the flesh and sin in who I am. Me too, by the way. All of us are like that. And you're tempted to think to yourself, I'm a lesser person today because I fell 5 minutes ago. Well, look, it's part and parcel of how you were born. You're not less in God's eyes because of that, because he's died for all of those things. In fact, not only did Jesus die for your sins when you came to him, he died for the sins you'll do this next week. And so your worth in his eyes doesn't change. Doesn't change. A lot of false religions tend to put those two together. It's a satanic ploy to say your worth before your God, whoever that God is, your worth before your God changes from moment to moment based upon whether you're acting worthily of him. And that's just not true, because everything that we've done poorly in terms of rejecting God, Christ has died for already. So that's why when John writes about us being God's children, he says, we're called the children of God, and then there's a break in the sentence. He says, and we are, with amazement, and we are. That's who you are. That's who you are. So when you discuss things with other people, or when people treat you poorly, instead of having an inflated ego idea of who you are, you can say, well, if we want to get down to what I really deserve nothing. And I really deserve that comment or that negative thing to happen. But the amazing thing about my life is even in the face of that, because of what Christ has done for me, God calls me his child, and I am. If your sense of identity is built on anything other than that, you'll go Haman on us. You will. You just do. And you start walking around talking about your accomplishments. It just is. So, there's a lot in this. And he's in an extreme case. So really, his problem is pride. It's pride. And that's all pride is. It's an inflated sense of who you are. And it's usually built on your accomplishments or your traits. That's what pride is. But biblically, pride is not a good trait. You can be proud of other people in a different sense of the word. But if you're proud of yourself, you'll go all Haman on us if you're not careful. Remember, look, he does this. Remember, he said, do you know who I am? He goes through this litany. Look, let me tell you about the splendor of my riches. Let me tell you about the number of sons I have. Let me tell you about the promotions that I've had from the king who's honored me, and how I've advanced above all the officials and servants. Have I told you how great I am? He goes through the whole litany after he gets really mad at Mordecai. He says, does he know who I am? Let me tell you who I am, family. This is who I am. I deserve that kind of respect. We will all do this. We will all do this. Don't go all Haman. Have your identity built on who God thinks of you, not who you want to think of yourself. You'll go all Haman on us. And you'll constantly be angry with people because they don't recognize it. This is just very common. This is just humanity. Even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. You know, we do this bragging too, by the way. We do it more subtly than this, but, you know, we do this. Look, and this is what God says about that kind of pride. Isaiah 13:11, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. There are no soft words in that sentence. Pride goeth before. Yeah, how about that? So pride is something that God detests, because what it basically is you saying in the face of God, I'm a somebody, maybe almost divine somebody compared to God. It starts to put you as the center of the universe is what it does. And it elevates you far beyond what you really are. Many of us don't have the accomplishments to do that rationally, but many of us lie to ourselves about what our accomplishments are so we can get a little of that boost. And you notice too, this kind of thing, pride in this particular sense, is a relative measure between people. That's why Mordecai and Haman had a problem. Because Haman wanted to be shown to be above Mordecai. Pride is always an elevation issue. Which is why when you're humbled, when you go lower, it mentions in the Bible, you go low. So it's really it's a relative thing between people. But while God's up there, the largest being in the universe, and we're down here going, well, I think about that chance, but yeah, man, I don't know. And we're doing this kind of stupid thing. He's going, stop it. Stop it. Stop it. You're all down here and I'm up here. So he'll define your worth. You don't have to go through this kind of thing for the proud stuff. And then, you know, he was humiliated in a wonderful way. He was humiliated. Remember as he marched Mordecai on the horse around town? So the king does to the ones he honors. Meh, 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 meh. So even through the midst of that, he's probably filled with wrath through it, but he's not showing it because he's got to be a king's representative about how the king's honoring this guy. He's got this gigantic mental confusion inside his head that he can't quite get straight, that God somehow honors Mordecai and finds Mordecai worthy and he doesn't find me worthy? How is that possible? So this cognitive dissonance is just driving him crazy. And it'll drive you crazy too. And God will eventually humiliate us. And that's not in a bad sense. We use humiliation as a way to make people feel smaller than they are so we feel larger, relatively speaking. But this humiliation is biblical humiliation. It's just taking you back to normal. You know, if you understand who you are at the honest, authentic level, and then you elevate yourself, humiliation is just bringing you back to normal. It's not taking you below. It's just bringing you back to normal. That's all it is. Yeah. I've got a few passages to show on this. Proverbs 29:23. One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. So you start to get, does that sound familiar to you from the New Testament? We start to get this idea that if you artificially elevate your estimation of who you are with other people, it seems like God's in the business of switching that around on you. The humiliation process. You're going to go through a correction. Like right now, the stock market is in a low correction from being a little bit high. Well, you elevate yourself too high, yeah, God's going to be quick to correct you, to bring you back to normal. Proverbs 29 starts to hint at these messages. Ezekiel 21:26, thus says the Lord God, remove the turban and take off the crown. Things shall not remain as they are. Exalt that which is low and bring low that which is exalted. Isn't that a great verse? Take off the crown. I want to say this to so many people who strut their stuff. Take off the crown. Things are not going to be like this forever. Because the people who think of themselves as high will eventually be low. And guess what? The people who know they're low will eventually be made high. Does that sound like a New Testament verse to you? Yeah. Like maybe this verse? Matthew 19:30. But many are first will be last, and the last first. This is a biblical theme. And I could go back further. This is a biblical theme. And God loves those who understand who they really are. And because of the universality of sin, loves those who say, yep, this just is who I am. And I am in need of a redeemer. That's who I am. But pride gets in the way of you recognizing the need for a redeemer in your life. That's why pride is such an important thing for God to smash. Because without that, you'll think that you're just fine and dandy. Fine and dandy. One more, Matthew 23:12. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. By the way, these are in the context, I think it's the first one, in the context of the two guys praying. Remember the Pharisee and the publican, the tax collector? And the Pharisee says all these great wondrous things about himself and all that kind of, and the publican, the tax collector, basically admits to God, man, I'm a down here person. Well, guess what? These roles will change, and they're not forever. Take off the crown, because it doesn't go forever. Yeah. Okay, we need to wrap this up. So in the end, in this whole process of humiliation and the pride and all that kind of stuff, I don't want you to take Haman and compartmentalize him in your head as someone who's really bad and unlike me. Because he may be extreme, but you're just like him. You're just like him. We are all like him. If indeed you were born with a sinful DNA, which we all have, these kinds of things, these temptations to elevate who you are in other people's eyes is a constant temptation. And you suddenly wonder whether or not you're worthy of anybody's love, of anyone's respect. I mean, you start to worry about maybe I'm really a nothing in the context of all the people I'm in. And so you end up resorting to different tactics to elevate people's estimation of who you are so that you will be respected, that's usually for men, or that you'll be loved, that's usually for women. And you'll do these manipulative things, and you'll recount all of your accomplishments and how nice you are, and I mean so many things, and you'll actually talk yourself into thinking, I'm worthy of these people's attention, but they're not giving it to me, I'll just have to work more at that. And you'll go all Haman on us. And then when people don't recognize it, when they don't stand up and honor you when you come in a room, you get mad at them. So this is a common syndrome. We do this. This is part and parcel to sin. It's just part and parcel to sin. And all of us in this room are experienced in that. So use Haman not as a compartmentalized, gosh, I'm glad I'm not like him, but as kind of the end result if you start forming your sense of worth on your own estimation instead of God's. That's where you go. That's where you go. Okay, I think we're done. Are we done, Jim? Yes, we are. Okay, so next week we'll go into chapter 7. In fact, next week we have chapters 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And we're going to do it mostly in story form as we wrap up the entire story. And what I want you to do is we're going to do sort of what they do in Jewish synagogues, which they'll be doing in the middle of next week when they celebrate Purim, in the middle of next week. And what you do is when we read, I'm going to read this story aloud. We're going to make a couple of points, but we're largely going to just crash through the rest of the story. And some great justice happens. But as we go, when the name of Haman is said, you get to make noise and try and drown out his name. How? However you want to. So if you're a little timid and you just want to boo, boo. You can do that. That's fine. If you go to a Jewish synagogue next week, they'll actually go with big noisemakers, those rattles, the ones you spin them around like this. They'll come like one on each hip. They're ready to go. They're waiting because they're going to read the entire story of Esther, and they're waiting for Haman's name to come up, and they'll try and drown out his name. And every time the name of Esther or the name of Mordecai comes up, you can cheer and clap and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna end Esther that way next week, just 2 days before what all the synagogues in the country are going to do. So you'll get a flavor for what that's all about. And we'll wrap up the entire story, and you'll see in the big picture the providence of God to control the ending despite everything else. Yeah. So it'll be a little embarrassing, but that's what we're going to do. By the way, I'm going to buy an air horn. So maybe, yeah. After I'll turn our ear. Hearing aids off. Well, no, maybe I won't do that. That's too much. But I'll figure something out. We got a tambourine. Cowbells. Okay. Anyway, that's next week, and we'll finish the story. And again, you are free to look ahead and finish the story 8 through 10. It's an incredible finish to the whole thing. We have Haman needs justice, and by the way, that communique is still out there across the country for people to die in several months' time. We got to fix that. So that's on the table for next week. Father in heaven, we thank you for these great narratives. And we thank you that you are in more control than meets our eye. And we can rest in that. We take comfort in that nothing is out of control from your perspective when it looks like it's out of control from ours. And Father, there's also the sense of justice. You see injustice. There's so many Psalms talk about the fact that you see the injustice going on, and you are motivated to action because of those injustices. Maybe not on our time schedule, but on your time schedule. So nothing escapes your gaze. So Lord, as we look at these stories and we rely on you in the narrative of our own lives, we ask that through your Spirit you would prevent us from becoming Hamans. That you prevent us from becoming self-centered, self-consumed, self-promoting people. And that, Lord, that you would, through the power of your word, reassure our hearts to the fact that we are indeed loved. We are indeed loved. We are indeed respected. And has nothing to do with the track record of our sins or the track record of our good. It has to do not with our accomplishments, but with the accomplishments of Christ. And that's what our identity is based on. And so, Lord, as we sit here, we're shocked by the fact that we're called the children of God. I mean, really. And yet we are. And yet we are. So through your Spirit, I pray you would protect us from the temptation of what pride calls to us. And that eventually ends up in this grotesque character of Haman. God, we do not want to be Hamans. But we see the potential in our souls. And only through your power resonant in us can that be stopped and turned around. We're called your children, and we are. And, that's enough. And that's a lot. So thanks now for this in Jesus' name. Amen.